Hello, in today's video, now that we have the ship tutorial over and done with, we're kind of in between projects at the moment, and I thought I would talk a little bit about this. So we made this diorama just quickly in an hour or so, a couple hours, for a video that we made. I don't know if you noticed, but we upload videos every day. And the content kind of varies from 2D to 3D, illustration, 3D modeling, that kind of thing. And this was one of the products that we quickly made. A few people requested tutorials on how we put this together, and I just wanted to make a brief video, brief-ish, we'll see how long it takes, just to show you how we kind of made this. We used some of the sculpting tools in Maya, which in all honesty aren't the best. Maya isn't very good like ZBrush or Blender in actually like taking, like you can see here, the detail and then baking that to a lower resolution mesh. We certainly can do it, it just takes quite a while. I'm not sure whether we'll do that in this tutorial, but I can certainly show you how we use the sculpting tools to like add dents and things to these stairs, and how we add these rocks and this sand texture and all these other little bits as well. And also a few other little tricks that I used to UV this, because the actual mesh itself, because it had to be quite high res to sculpt on top of, was not the most easy of meshes to UV. I would not recommend using these techniques necessarily entirely to create a portfolio piece, but I will certainly be happy to show you how we do this, just to create like a piece of art, like a fun project for yourself. So first things first, there's this great website called Polyhaven. So you probably know about this already if you've been modeling for a little while, whether you use Blender, Maya, or basically any other 3D software these days. I think we even mentioned this in our ship modeling project when we got to the texturing. Essentially, this site, bunch of free materials, absolutely fantastic. You can get materials, you can get HDRI images, or HDR images, sorry. You can get models, and they're really, really high quality, all PBR texture materials, from lemons to rats to statues and cars and stuff like that. They basically have everything. And whenever we're working on projects or quick things for videos, we'll typically use some assets in the background just to speed up the process. If we're making something entirely from scratch for a portfolio or for a client, obviously we'll make all of this ourselves. But for this particular diorama here, these rocks actually and this sand texture was used from Polyhaven. We modeled the gate, the steps, the pyramid, and the cacti. I never actually know what the plural version is. We modeled those entirely ourselves and textured those ourselves too, just procedurally. But yeah, I'll include links in the description for this website. By default, you'll be presented with a screen like this. It just show you a bunch of nice renders people have made. If you come up to assets, then go to models, you can see here there's already some of the rocks we used. They have various different ones, and I think these are all 3D scans. So they've got all of these. This Namak, I have no idea how to pronounce this, so sorry if you do, and I'm butchering it. But Namakaland boulder, and then they've got a series of these in different sizes and colors and shapes and stuff like that. They've got a bunch of other things as well, like plants and things, all kinds of things. Apples, we're not going to be putting that in our desert scene, but yeah, you get the point. So I've already gone ahead and downloaded a bunch of those earlier. So these are my boulders and these are my rocks, and then I've also downloaded a sand material off of this website as well, which I think is in here somewhere. Let's have a look. Textures, and then we can just have a look for terrain, and then sand. And then you've got a few different types of sand, and I think the one I'm using it's one of these, I'm sure. Maybe this one, coastal sand. And you can download these for free from 1K up to 8K if you really, really need to ramp up the detail. I tend to like pick 4K unless something's going to be really in the background, and maybe 8K if we're going to be seeing it quite up close. There's some really nice ones here. This one I've used before for some beach scenes, and it's got like tire tracks and stuff. Really cool. Anyway, you can also support them by donating, I think. And I would definitely encourage you to do so, because these people are fantastic and they provide this service for free. We're not affiliated with them at all, by the way. Just would like to plug them and show them off, because we use a lot of their assets. for our personal work anyway. Okay, so let's get right to it. Let's create something like the gate that we made. So I'm just going to create a cube, and I'm just going to center that on the grid. If you're not sure how I'm doing that, we've gone over it in previous tutorials, but if you double click on the translate tool here and click edit pivot, you can then put that on the bottom of your cube. I'm going to press W again just to come back to translate. Hold down X and that will grid snap. As you can see here, I'm like snapping it to each point on the grid. So I'm literally just moving it up in Y and getting it to sit on the grid. That way when I come to scale it, I can scale it off of the grid rather it being down like this. It's not a massive deal, it's just something I like. I like the grid to kind of be the base, the floor of whatever we're making. So let's go ahead and push it out like this. Maybe something like this. Okay, and then that kind of thickness looks good to me. To add the gate in the middle, we're going to use the multi-cut tool. I'm going to hold down shift, right click to come up to the brain, work with me here. Pivot menus, quick access menus, whatever you want to call them. And then I'm going to hold down control and middle mouse click just to put that square in the middle. And I'm going to do the same on each side there. Okay. Then I'm going to use the multi-cut tool again, and I'm going to set this one for the height that we want our gate to be. So I would like it to be quite tall, maybe up to something like here. I'm then going to hold down right click and go to face. We can also come over to the modeling toolkit on the right hand side, and you've got your different selection modes here as well for face, vertex, object, edge, and so on. We're just going to go with face select for now. We're going to select these middle ones and just delete them, and there you go, you made a hole in your wall. If only that was that easy in real life. We're then going to go ahead and select all these edges except for these bottom ones here, because if we select those bottom ones we won't be able to bridge, which is exactly what we're going to do. So I'm going to hold down shift right click and then go to bridge. Okay, then that's just going to join those two together. Now we could just leave this as it is, but I would like this to be a rounded gate. Okay, have an arc to it. So I'm going to select those two edges. I'm then going to come over to bevel here in the modeling toolkit, or you can hold down shift right click and bevel with edges selected. I'm then going to increase the fraction up to 1. Okay, so we have a point there at the moment. That actually looks kind of cool. I'm half tempted to go with that instead. Maybe we go with something a little bit more angular this time. And no, let's just do an arch, because that's what we had in the previous video, and just in case you're not sure how to do that. So I'm going to set the segments to something like 6. Okay, and that's going to create some very, very ugly topology like this, which we'll need to fix. Also, if I press free, you'll probably see, this is a great way to test for this, because we've beveled and we already had an edge in the middle here, it's not quite joined up. Sometimes it will automatically merge vertices that overlap once you bevel, sometimes it won't. So if I go ahead and select these, you can see these are all on top of each other. All we're going to do is hold down shift, right click, merge vertices, then merge vertices to center, and we'll do the same for these ones over here, okay? And then now you can see if I press free, just to preview that, as ugly as it looks, you can now see that we don't have any extra vertices where we don't want them. Okay, next thing I'm going to do is, now this might seem counterintuitive, but if you've seen how we work in other tutorials, it will make sense in a second. I'm going to delete all of this, because I need to clean up this section, and it's very, very important that we do that before we add more divisions to do sculpting. The reason being is, whenever you're sculpting something, you want to have as even quads as possible. Okay? It's just going to make your life a lot easier when it comes to actually adding those details, because if you have uneven topology, when you go and smooth things, it means that in some areas of your model, when you go to sculpt, you're going to have a higher resolution than others. Let's say up here we had a much higher resolution compared to down here. If we're drawing a line from here to here, it's going to start off looking quite like chunky. You're going to be able to see all the different polygons, and then by the time we get up here, it's then going to look really smooth. Then it's going to get all chunky again, and we don't want that. We want it to be consistent. Okay? So we need to make sure that we fix this up and make the topology as even as possible before we do anything like that. Okay? So I'm just going to delete all of these vertices and edges because we don't want them. They're disgusting. I'm just going to hold down left click and drag that across. We're then going to use the scale tool just to flatten that out. It's always good to have a protective edge here And we'll be covering this in polys anyway, in quads, so that everything's nice and even. Ordinarily, you wouldn't do that if you weren't sculpting things. And especially if it wasn't a curved model, right? If it wasn't a surface that had some curvature to it. You would just, you know, if it's a flat surface, you wouldn't necessarily have all these polys going everywhere, all these faces. But because we're going to be sculpting, we have to. Okay. Then I'm going to have this one come straight up as well. You could terminate that differently, like maybe like this, and that would also be a quad. But because we want this to be as even squares as possible, we're not going to do that. Okay. Next thing I'm going to do is just add in some more edges here using the multi-cut tool. Okay, that's not quite even enough, so I'm going to go ahead and just delete those. I'm going to press Control Delete this time, because that will get rid of vertices as well. If I just press Delete, you can see that leaves all the vertices. We don't want that. Okay. What I'll do instead is I will use the Insert Edge Loop tool, which will be in the Poly Modeling Toolkit here. Okay, we just press this button. I'm going to double click this. That is not the Insert Edge Loop tool, that's the Target World tool. My apologies. I have this keybound, so I don't always remember where exactly it is. This is the multi-cut tool. Let me quickly pause the recording and I will find that real quick and show you what it is. Okay, sorry. If you hold down Shift and right click while in object selection mode, you can see here, if you just come down to here, you've got Insert Edge Loop tool. Okay. So once you have that selected, we're going to double click this. We're going to click multiple edge loops. By default, that will say 2. And if I just click anywhere, it's going to insert 2 edge loops equal distance from all the other edges in there, right? So it'll be nice and even. We want to match this topological density here of these ones going horizontally. So I'm going to increase this up to something like maybe 12. And we'll see if that matches. Yep, that looks pretty good. Maybe we'll add just one going across here, and then we'll add maybe another 10 going across here. Bit too much, maybe 9. Okay, then let's go ahead and add a few going up this way. Not quite perfect. So we're definitely getting some difference in edge density here, or face density here, which is a bit annoying, so we need to find a nice happy medium. I am gonna extend these across. It's not these ones, sorry, we don't want to break the shape of the gate. Just to try and even that out slightly. Okay, cool. And I always like to reset this tool just because it's handy just to do single edges like this as well. Okay, now that we have that done, I think we probably could spend more time getting that as even as possible, and you can certainly do that if you'd like, but for the sake of this tutorial, I think that will do for now. What we can now do then is go ahead and extrude and bring our thickness back. Now we have it the same on both sides. Okay, we'll make that a little thinner. And then I'm going to use the same Insert Edge Loop tool. Okay, if you're wondering how I got that back very quickly, I just have it keybound. But remember, Shift right click in object selection, you can get it from there. I'm then going to add a few edges going up this way, just to get the right topological density, so a bit of a mouthful, on the sides as well. Okay, and then this will be our base for sculpting. I like to just save a backup of this, so we're going to call this gate underscore backup bkp, and then hide this, because we are going to subdivide the crap out of this guy now. Best way to do that, I think we've shown you how to do this in a few other videos before, is select all the faces, hold down Control and right click, go to 2 edge and then 2 edge perimeter. Okay, and the reason we selected all these edges here, or faces going up the like the width here, not the fronts, the sides, sorry, is because when we convert that to edges, it's then going to select all the edges, almost anyway, of the ones that we need to keep sharp when we add subdivisions. And the way we're going to do that without actually smoothing the edges here is we're just going to go hold down Shift, right click, and go to crease again. I'm going to hold down middle mouse click, okay, hold that down, and then drag it to the right. And do that a few times just to make sure it's as high as it will go. Now if I smooth this, pressing 3 on the keyboard, you can see it's holding its shape. It looks a little funky, but that's just because the normals get a bit messed up when you smooth with creasing on. Now we're going to add a few divisions to this. I'm holding down Shift, right click, and then going to smooth, and I'm pressing G just to repeat action. I'm going to do that one more time. Okay, so that is quite dense. If this were Blender or ZBrush, ideally, you could create a Dynamesh with this. So the mesh dynamically deforms based on where you're sculpting. And it can much more easily handle more polygons. So genuinely, I would not recommend using the sculpting tools in Maya. That maybe is just my personal preference. I think sometimes they can be handy if you need to do things quickly, like adding damage to hard surface models. But for sculpting stuff like this, I would not do it. But some people requested a tutorial on it, and so this is how you do it. And it can be a bit of fun sometimes if you're just looking to like mess around one evening, which is like what we did with our model anyway. So anyway, I'll stop bashing it now. If I go back to edge select mode, it still has our creases selected. Okay, I'm going to go ahead, go back to crease tool, hold down middle mouse click again, and then just drag in the opposite direction, left, and that will remove our creases. Okay, so now we have the exact same model with nice, even quad topology. I'm sure a lot of you are looking at this and cringing on the inside, being like, why do you have so many for this mesh? Well, that's because we're going to sculpt on it, and you need it. Again, I would not recommend using this unless you're going to bake out a normal map, which is why we keep this backup. Okay, and I can show you how to do that later on. I would not recommend showing this level of topological density in a portfolio because they will laugh at you. That is way too high. This is just a sculpt on. Okay, so now that we have this, we're going to call this gate underscore sculpt, and I like to do it in all caps just to really get it into my thick head. That's what that one is, if it wasn't already obvious. Okay, so now we have a mesh. We are going to come over to the sculpting tab. We've got a few different tools here. For the diorama that we made, I really only use a few. So you have the lift surface tool. By default, you'll probably see yours like this. Okay, you're going to see the wireframe of the mesh. I don't really like to see that. I feel like it's pretty unnecessary, unless you need to smooth things out. To turn this off, literally just double click the tool. It will bring up this menu, come under display, and then untick wireframe. We can go ahead and start sculpting on this. And maybe yours will look more like this when you first start sculpting. And you'll be like, why is that coming out like this? I've just developed a growth. Well, it's because your strength's way too high. So I like to set this down to something like 0.01 or 0.1. I don't like it to be too high, but you can see here we're now sculpting on our mesh. And undo that, I can draw a little smiley face, and then type hey on it. Okay. I think if you found this buried in the Egyptian desert, you'd probably be pretty confused. Okay, but that sort of shows you what we can do with that tool. Then also, if you hold down right click on your mouse, right click, sorry. If you hold down middle mouse click and then drag from left to right, you can increase the size. If you drag up and down, if it will let me. Okay, if you drag up and down, that increases strength. I don't really like to do that. Because I can't really tell exactly what it's doing. I just like to look at the values, so I'll keep this window open most of the time. We also have smooth. This will smooth out the surface. If I come to this corner here, I can just go and then smooth it out and make it look like cheese, but we don't want to do that because it's a rock. You can also smooth the surface of a mesh. This will even out the topology. You have pull a single vertex. This actually just pulls the mesh like this. If I make this bigger, it pulls more, and then yeah, we can manipulate this like a block of cheese as well, but we don't want to do that because this isn't like an organic shape, right? This is a man-made thing. Level a surface as well, that will also flatten the surface off. This can be quite good used sparingly and in a small, with a small brush size to add like little dings and nicks to the corner of things and rocks. So I like to use that. We use that a lot for the diorama that we made. You can also softly lift a surface. This works kind of like the first brush, lift the surface, except slightly softer, a bit more gentle. You got the random spray as well. This one, we're not going to use that. You can also imprint stamps, which is really cool. with this menu open, I can come over to stamp, take a use stamp, and then import, or pick a stamp actually, and mine will come with various different ones. So if you're familiar with alphas, a black and white image like this, then you already know what you're looking at. But if not, a stamp will literally take a black and white image, white being the actual area affected, black being unaffected, and use that to add as our brushstroke, if you like. So I already have one selected here under sculpting stamps. You can see it here. If I come to my mesh and then drag out like this, you can actually see the stencil, and I can kind of scale it up. I'm just holding down left click and I can rotate it. And if I do that, you can see that then puts the shape on the mesh. If I hold down control and do the same thing, that does the inverse. And it's a good thing to mention actually, that's how it works for all brushes. Left click by default, it will extrude. Hold down control and left click, it will what's the opposite of extrude? I guess extrude in. It will dig into the mesh instead. Another tool we used quite a lot for this is cut fine strokes into surface, because this, if I decrease the size of the brush, will kind of cut more chiseled looking lines if I hold down control and left click, compared to this one, which will actually, it's not too different. I think it's because the mesh resolution is quite low, but this looks more like a softer line, whereas this is slightly more chiseled. At least it should be. I'm probably going to go ahead and increase the divisions of this again. I would say, if your computer is on the lower end, this is now going to become a problem, because your mesh is going to be very dense, and saving this will take a while, or a little bit, but it is worth it to get some more density in. If I come back to that tool again, you can see now our brush is a lot cleaner. I can get much finer lines. Okay, so this is literally all we did, is we subdivided it up to this point, and then just had a nice fine brush, and then literally just started drawing lines on the thing. It can be quite fiddly, because drawing straight lines is a little tough, but then I just kind of wasn't really following any specific pattern. I just started to create my own thing, imagining up some sort of design. So you could maybe do something like this if you want. Go crazy with it. I mean, I always encourage you to find reference. I like mine to wrap around the full size of the model. So we're going to have it go around like that. Okay, and you can sculpt up the back as well if you want to. I'm not going to, because we're not going to see it. And then maybe we'll have like a couple extra lines here. If I can get that to go straight, please. My hand is a bit shaky today, too much coffee. Okay, maybe something like that. And the lines don't have to be perfect. It really depends what you're trying to make. I like to imagine this is kind of an old ruin. So it's probably not going to be perfectly maintained anyway. So some wobbly lines is not the end of the world. It's probably just because the pillar is, you know, slowly breaking. Let's have some going across like this. Okay, and again I'm holding down control, left click to get that in. And then you could also add like some little shapes here and there, like maybe you want to add some circles. You know, maybe these are like little sun things. You know, who knows what this ruin is like. Maybe they worship the sun. You know, just make it up as you go, or find some reference as well. Maybe that has some like waves coming out of it like this, you know, and then we could also have like some extra little details like this, if I just have those coming across. It kind of looks like a Wi-Fi beacon now. I didn't quite mean to do that, but you get the idea, okay? So you can kind of very, very quickly sculpt into your mesh using various different things. If I wanted to go ahead and add chips, again, we could use this tool here, the level a surface. Increase the size of my brush ever so slightly, and then I can just, holding down control, kind of add a few little chips, and I'm just doing it gently on the corners here, just to pull things away, and that looks really, really cool. It's like some of the rock has come away over time or something, which I guess naturally it would, right? We could even go ahead and maybe add a real big one on this corner here, like so, and maybe have that come out a little bit more. And then kind of taper off, maybe a few little ones. Okay, and you can see already that's adding a much more dimension to our model. And then just kind of go ham. Go crazy with it. Do what you like. Follow your reference or make up your own design. And then yeah, we maybe spent about an hour just doing this, 40 minutes. Just quickly adding a design. You can also go ahead and use the stamp if you want to. If I come back to that, maybe we'll use this one. Just to add some extra little detail in there. Maybe a whole bit is chipped away like that. It kind of ends up looking a bit more like concrete. We can maybe pick a different stamp. The default ones aren't the best, to be honest. You could either make your own in Photoshop as long as it's a black and white image, or you can find some. I know there's many free ones, there's purchased ones, whatever you like. That looks a little bit crazy, but you get the idea, right? And I'm just dragging out here with the left click. You can very, very quickly just add lines and details to your things. Okay, after that, we could go ahead and bake out a normal map, but there's something kind of cool I'd like to show you that if you're not familiar with, will save you a lot of time. Instead of adding UVs to this, so we can add image-based texture maps, we can use something called a triplanar projection map, which is really cool because if you're lazy and you don't want to UV unwrap your models, you can use triplanar. It has its uses. A lot of the time you don't want to use it because you really don't get a lot of control over where things are placed, but basically triplanar is going to project, I think as the name suggests, from 3 different directions your texture map onto the model. So it saves us having to actually UV unwrap it. Let's go ahead and show you what that looks like. So I'm just going to create an HDRI, or I'm going to create a sky dome light using Arnold, and adjust some of the settings here. We won't go into all these details right now, but I like to adjust max bounces to 10 because 1000 is way too high and it's just going to increase your render time. Samples to 3. Samples will generally just increase the quality of the light. I just said increase. Increase the quality of the light. And then color will be the actual HDR image, the HDRI that you use, which I also downloaded from Polyhaven. I think this one actually in particular, Quantani Noon, I think that's how you pronounce that, Quantani. Just because it added kind of the right lighting that I was looking for a desert. I'm going to select File, come over to Image Name here. I have all mine stored in the Images folder. I'm then going to look for it in here. I have quite a few, so here we go. Quantani, late afternoon. So what I like to do then is go ahead and chuck that on a layer down here. Just press this button, name that something like lights. Then I'm going to tick this empty box here twice until it says R for reference, so that when I left click in my viewport, I can now no longer select it, and it just is like a nice thing, like a quality of life thing to me, I think, because we're going to be constantly selecting things here. I don't want to accidentally select the light. It's a bit of a pain. And you can still select it from your channel box, from your outline, sorry, if you need to. Okay, so if I go ahead and render that now, I'm going to come up to render and then hit Arnold. This will just give us a render of our mesh. If you don't want to see the light in the background, you can come back over to the attribute editor, come to the sky dome light shape, and turn camera to 0. Okay, I don't really want to see it, so I'll just turn that off for now. And you can see now we're getting some nice lighting on here, and we can go ahead and rotate this around to change the angle that it's coming in from. Okay, maybe we'll hit something kind of like that. That looks nice to me. Maybe actually the other way around, because I want to be able to see the chips I made. Something like that. Okay, cool. If you come back up to render and go to viewport 2.0, that will turn that off. Now, next thing is, we downloaded a bunch of rocks off of Polyhaven as well. I've already saved mine out to here. Okay, so I'm going to start out by bringing in this one, and when you download these, I can't remember whether the files come in a separate texture folder or not. I have just put them in a separate texture folder and named them appropriately just for my own sanity. Let's start with these ones. And they might come in quite large, so I'm just going to scale those down to something like this. and they may already have a material applied to them. We don't want to use that though, because it's just going to be a default Thong shader. We want to use an Arnold shader, so I'm going to hold down right click, assign new material, Arnold AI standard surface. Okay, I also like to press this button here, just because then it's going to show us a default shader. Otherwise we see everything with the textures, and I don't really like seeing that for the most part. And it won't always give you a clear idea anyway. Also just going to turn off the light, just so things are a bit clearer too. Okay, so now that we've applied our shader, we're just going to hit this button up here, this little blue ball. We're going to find our material in here, which is this one, I believe. No, it's not this one. Okay, if you can't find it, select your model. Once you've got the model selected, press this. Then just press this again with this thing here selected, and it'll bring up your shader. And I'm just going to name this Boulder 1. It would help if we spelled Boulder correctly. Boulder 1. Okay. Now, first things first, we are going to take our texture. Okay. Our texture maps. I'm going to create a file. So I'm just going to press Tab, type in File, and then go to Texture. Okay. And we're going to create 3 of these because we have 3 different texture maps that we're interested in using. Okay. So on the first one, we're going to come to Image Name. Okay. I'm going to copy and paste the file path to our texture files. And then what we're looking for here is the diffuse. Now this is our color map. Okay, so we're going to open that up. Then we're going to plug the color into the base color. Okay, that will give color to our model. We're then in this one going to do the same thing, but this time we're going to take the rough. Now the roughness is going to define how shiny or reflective an object is. Okay. With this, we're going to change a few settings here. We're going to change color space to utility and then raw. You're also going to take alpha is luminance. Okay, then you're going to click this and take out the out color red and put that in the specular roughness. Okay, with this one, we're then going to take again the same file path and we're going to take the normal. Now, this is going to basically create fake detail for us through a trick of the light rendering technique. There's one other node we need to create. It's going to be called AI normal map. Okay, this will translate our file into a normal map that the shader can use. We're going to plug in the out value into the normal camera and the color into the input. Okay, then for this normal map texture file, we're also going to change the color space to raw, but don't tick alpha is luminance, otherwise it will break. You only want to do that for the roughness. Okay, if we go ahead and minimize this, we'll re-enable our light and then do our render here again, and we'll see what that looks like. You can now see we have some rocks, and you know, that took a couple minutes, and we downloaded that free, and they're very, very nice detailed as well. These are just the 4K ones. You can even get 8K ones or lower resolution ones too if you'd like. And the meshes are pretty well optimized as well. They're all triangulated. It looks kind of dense, but it's not too bad really. We'll come back into our viewport. Next thing I like to do is just create a plane. I'm holding our shift right click with nothing selected and going to plane. We're then going to scale this up just to roughly be the size of our base. Let's assume that this guy is maybe set back a little bit, like so. Okay, then what I'll do is just increase the divisions of this up to maybe 48 each way. What I like to do as well is just go into vertex selection mode. Press B on the keyboard to turn on soft select, and if you hold down B and middle mouse click, you can also adjust the radius. You can see there, kind of like a heat map, what's going to be affected. And if I then translate this, you can now see it's pulling everything up. Whereas if I had that turned off, it's just pulling that one vertice. If I have a little bit of the radius, it just does that area. If I do it massively, then it does a lot of it, okay? So we can use this to create a bit of a more interesting shape. A lot of our texture here is going to come from the normal map that we'll apply for the sand. But the normal map will only take you so far. You want to add like bigger details, like massive bumps like this, actually in the mesh itself. We can do that with something called a displacement map as well, but just for today's video, we're not going to get into that. We will probably make separate videos on that at another point. And it's not really necessary for this. We didn't use it as well for our original piece. So just adding a little bit of waviness, kind of randomizing the size a little bit, making sure that the base of our doorway here is actually connected to the ground. And now you can see we've added a little bit of bumpiness, nothing crazy, but just a bit. What we can then do is add our texture map for the sand. Okay, so with this we're going to use UVs, but because it's a plane and we just scaled it up linearly, we won't actually have to change anything. It's already a perfect square. So we're going to assign another new material, and I'm just going to do AI standard surface again. We're going to rename this sand. Okay, we're going to go back and get our sand texture. I have mine stored over here. Sand, I've got a few different ones, so I'm going to go with this one. It's an 8K map, which is a little bit high, but it's the one that I like and it's the only one I have on hand. You could use 4K, I probably would normally, but since that's the one I have, that's the one we'll use. And then just like before, we're going to do file and texture. Again, 3 times for those different maps. Okay, we're going to plug that into the base color. Out color red into the specular roughness, and then this one again, if you remember, we're going to create AI normal map. I'm going to plug that here and here. Okay, you don't necessarily need to add a normal map, but I would certainly advise you to do it. It's quite cheap in terms of resources, and without it, I'll show you what a difference it makes in a second. So we'll go ahead and take our color. This might take a little bit longer to load just because of the size. Okay, then we'll go ahead and take our roughness. Okay, then we'll set that utility to raw and then alpha is luminance. The reason we're setting utility to raw, the color space to raw, is because by default RGB is not really what we want for maps like this, black and white maps that are altering the roughness. You want raw color space. It just allows them to work better, and you can even see, you know, if I change this back to sRGB, you can see this looks way too shiny for sand, right? And that's what this map is doing. It's kind of telling our material, our shader, how reflective it should be. In sand, generally not very reflective, unless you get that really fine desert sand, then from a distance it might have a sheen to it, but this is probably not. A bit more choppy sand. So if I set it to raw, you can see that looks much rougher. Another thing you can do as well is bump up the diffuse roughness. That's generally quite good for much coarser materials like brick, chalk, sand even. And we'll go ahead and render that, and you'll see what it looks like without our bump map, our normal map. Okay, you can see it looks very, very kind of basic. There's not a whole lot going on. If I go ahead and plug in our normal, okay. You can see it has all this different bumpy information to it. Okay, it's going to take a little bit to load because of the file size. Utility raw. I also just like to tick this box as well, because if you don't, Maya's going to complain that the color space isn't RGB, even though it shouldn't be. If you turn this off, you won't get that error. If I go ahead and render this now, give it a second, you'll see we have a whole bunch more detail that we're basically just getting for free. Let me just give that a moment. Okay, you can see now we have so much more texture in this. It looks like it has all this dimension and it's shading, when really the geometry hasn't changed at all. It's just a trick of the light. If I go ahead and zoom out, you can see we've got all this lovely looking patterns on here now, right? And that took just one file map, one texture map. What you then can do is, I have a reasonably decent PC, so I can leave the render on. I then like to keep the IPR render running and then just start placing my rocks around. We'll just use this one for the sake of this tutorial. Maybe we'll have some like that. Maybe we'll scale these up a bit. Have these come like this. We'll create sort of like a funnel going towards the front there. Maybe we'll scale those down, rotate those around. I would very much recommend having a variety of rocks. Nature very rarely is repetitive. Things are normally quite random looking. But there you go, that's a few rocks for us there. Maybe I'll put a bit more in the back just to add some more interest. Maybe we'll turn those around. Something like so. Okay, that looks pretty good to me. Now, the last trick I can show you is what I was mentioning earlier, the triplanar projection for the textures for this bad boy over here. Because we're not going to be doing the UVs for this, we could, but I would like to show you that since that's what we did in the tutorial, and it's much quicker. We don't necessarily have to give our model UVs for this. What you can do is, I'm going to assign a new material to this, and we will call this gate shader. Okay, then we'll just focus in on that, and we'll just isolate that. Okay, we're going to press tab again to create a new material or new node, and we're going to type in AI tri, and there you go, AI triplanar. Okay, now we can do a quick demonstration here. If I get our file nodes again, the 3 that we will need. Okay, now I have this quite nice material that I also got from Polyhaven for a sandy brick material. I think I still have it. If not, I can always use something else, but let's have a quick look to see if I have it. Okay, it's this sandstone block material here that I have in 4K. If I open it up, you can see this very nice material. It's kind of like sandstone bricks, which I think suits this very well. Okay, so if I go ahead and put the color in here, I take the diffuse, and we literally just plug this in, okay? This is probably going to be way too small, by the way, so we can adjust the repeat UV, which will adjust how many times this pattern repeats. But if I go ahead and render this, okay, you're very going to quickly see, it looks like it's melting, right? This looks like a piece of bread or melted cheese or something. We're getting some horrifying stretching here. This looks nothing like what we want, okay? That's because we don't have UVs. So a quick way around this, if you have a model that you don't necessarily want to or need to UV, is to run this diffuse map, take the color, put it into input of our AI triplanar, take the out color and put that into the base color. Okay, we might need to adjust a few parameters here, such as the scale, but we'll go ahead and render that now and we'll see what that looks like. Okay, and you can now see that it has applied our material and it is not running off like nasty melted cheese anymore. Okay, you get some oddities like in these sections here, right, where it's not quite perfect or even, but it goes a long way, right? Especially since you don't actually UV this yourself, you're saving yourself a lot of time. So the trade-offs, you know, it does have some positives and negatives, but I think sometimes it can be worth it. Okay, it is looking a little small though, so we'll go ahead and adjust that in the triplanar settings. We can just do that from our attribute editor. By default, the scale will be set to 1. We'll try bumping that up to 2. We'll see what that looks like. Okay, that's a little better. Maybe let's up it to like 5. Maybe too much. We'll try 3. Something like that. Okay, there you go. So we still need to add the roughness and the bump, and that will improve things a lot. But you can see that's gone a long way to making this look a lot better. So because we're not using any UVs, again, we're going to need a triplanar for each input. Okay, every time you're using an image texture, you need a triplanar if you want to use triplanar projection. Again, I wouldn't recommend this for most cases. Just sometimes if you want to create something for yourself, or if you've got a background asset, or if it makes sense, it's kind of up to you. Then go ahead and use triplanar. Generally, if you have a more hero asset, you would not use triplanar. You would, at the most, use some procedural texturing, but largely you'd be painting things by hand. So let's go ahead and take the roughness. Again, utility raw, alpha is luminance, and the normal. Okay. Utility, raw, and keep alpha as luminance as is. Then we'll take the AI normal map. Okay, out color into input, out value into normal camera. And then again with the triplanar, out color red into specular roughness. You can also use the alpha. In this case though, I just like to use generally the out color red. Basically does the same thing. Okay, if I go ahead and render this now, so the reason why that is happening is because the scales are different. So let's have a look here. No, they are all the same. So why is that not working properly? Okay, so it turns out that actually we should have used not a normal map. Normal maps don't really seem to play nicely with triplanar. So fortunately, when we downloaded this material, we actually have a displacement map, which would ordinarily be used for displacing the geometry in a 3D manner, but we won't be getting into that. Instead, because it's black and white, we can just use it as a bump map. It's a bit of an older way to create normal or bump mapping, like texture difference like that, but it still works. So we'll plug in the displacement instead. In this case, you want to take alpha is luminance because it's black and white, and we'll take the out red, put that into the bump value, and then put the out normal into the normal camera. Okay, then make sure the scale of your triplanar is the same for all three. And now if I go ahead and render this, this should now work. Okay, and you can see the bump mapping has applied, except it's way too strong. So that will generally happen with bump mapping, because unlike a normal map, it's specifically designed to work alongside those other texture maps because it's a PBR material in this case. But because this isn't, we need to tweak it a little. So the bump depth by default will be 1. Let's change that down to something like 0.01. Okay, that might be a little too reduced. Maybe 0.005. Okay, there you go. Now we're getting some nice bumpy texture, and we didn't have to do any of the UVs ourselves. Sorry, selves. I can't speak today. Like magic, right? There you go. You've added bricks, no UVs on a sculpted mesh. It's very, very good for like quickly concepting things. And then we use this exact same process for everything else. The pyramid down here, and even the cactuses as well. So that is how we created that, and pretty much that's all the techniques we used. If you want to go ahead and create your own. If I missed anything or if you have any questions, please feel free, as always, to ask as many questions as you like in the comments below, and we'll try to get to everyone. I can even make a follow-up video if we need to as well. So yeah, thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you next time.